In stillness, the ego begins to unravel. It's not immediate and it's not obvious at first. In fact, the very first thing that happens when a person enters a period of total silence is discomfort. The mind starts racing, grasping for stimulation, for affirmation, for identity. It feels as if something is being taken away, but in reality, something false is simply being revealed. The ego is noisy by nature. It feeds on external validation, on reactions, on praise, and even on criticism. It doesn't care if the attention is positive or negative. What it needs is acknowledgement, proof that it matters, that it exists. That's why silence is so threatening to it. Because in silence, there is no echo. No confirmation, just you. When a man enters 30 days of total silence, it's not just a practice in quiet. It's an act of war against the part of himself that has been built by the opinions of others. The ego is built brick by brick through years of conditioning. It starts with needing approval from parents, then teachers, then peers, then romantic partners, employers, social media followers. The pattern continues for so long that the man forgets what his voice even sounds like without the background noise of other people's expectations. Silence is not simply peaceful, it is confrontational. It confronts the parts of you that are performative. It challenges the roles you've been playing. Roles of success, of strength, of charm, of intelligence. Roles that weren't always based on truth, but on what others expected of you. In the absence of applause or rejection, those roles lose their grip. And this is where the ego starts to panic. It tells you you're wasting time. It tells you you're being forgotten. It whispers that people will move on without you, that your value is tied to your visibility. It's clever. It will dress up its fear as logic, but it's fear nonetheless. Because when no one's watching, when no one's listening, the ego can't survive. It begins to dissolve. You start questioning everything you thought you were. You start noticing the impulses, the urge to check your phone, to prove a point, to be seen, to be heard, to correct, to explain. And when you resist those impulses, something deeper wakes up inside you. A new awareness begins to rise. An observer who doesn't speak, doesn't react, just notices. This process is uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels like losing your mind. But what's really happening is that the noise is falling away. You're not losing your mind. You're just losing the mind you borrowed from the world. The mind that was programmed by opinions, criticisms, expectations. And when that borrowed mind begins to fade, a strange thing happens. You realize you're still here, still breathing, still alive. In fact, more alive than ever. Because now your awareness is not being drowned out by the ego's noise. In the first week of silence, the ego fights hard. It tries to pull you back into the known world. It wants you to speak, to react, to validate its importance. But as the days pass, that fight weakens. The triggers that used to ignite anger or pride begin to lose power. You notice them, but you don't respond. You see them for what they are, temporary illusions trying to steal your presence. And the more you sit with them, the more you understand that you are not them. You are not your reaction. You are not your feelings. You are the one observing them all. This realization is subtle but life-altering. For the first time, you are not driven by your ego's need to defend, to prove, to protect. You are simply present. And in that presence, the false identity that the ego built over decades starts to crumble. It doesn't happen all at once. But piece by piece, the mask begins to fall. You become more honest, not just with others, but with yourself. You begin to see how much energy you wasted trying to be someone you're not. You see how deeply Your emotions were tied to how others perceived you. And now, in silence, those chains broke. There's no crowd, no spotlight, no feedback, and strangely, that's when your real voice emerges. Not your literal voice, but the voice of your inner being. It doesn't need praise. It doesn't need to win. It doesn't even need to be understood. It just needs to be. This is what silence reveals. The ego was never you. It was a shell, a defense mechanism, a mask, a tool perhaps, but not your essence. And when you stop feeding it, when you stop performing, when you sit in silence long enough for the noise to clear, the truth appears. Not in words, but in awareness. It's quiet, it's calm, and it's undeniable. The ego is addicted to reactions. It craves them like a drug. It doesn't care whether it's applause or anger, admiration or envy. It simply needs to be noticed. The ego's entire identity is built on the feedback loop between the self and the outside world. That's why silence is so powerful. It breaks the loop. It denies the ego its oxygen. The moment you stop speaking, stop posting, stop explaining, stop trying to be seen, the ego starts to feel suffocated. It's not because you're doing nothing. It's because you're doing something the ego can't manipulate. Silence is not passive. It is active resistance. It is strength disguised as stillness. It is the refusal to dance with drama. It is the act of no longer feeding the false self. When a person commits to 30 days of total silence, the ego enters withdrawal. It's like a caged animal. It paces back and forth, looking for a way out, seeking some kind of engagement to prove that it still exists. You will feel it. You'll feel the urge to correct people, the desire to explain yourself, the need to be understood. You'll want to reach for your phone, to share your thoughts, to defend your silence even. That's the ego scratching, clawing, begging for a reaction. And if you're not careful, it will convince you that your silence is weak, that you're being left behind, that people are forgetting you, that you need to speak up before you disappear. But none of that is true. That's not intuition, it's fear dressed up as logic. It's the ego's fear of being irrelevant. The truth is, the ego has no power unless you give it attention. Its fuel source is engagement. That's why it thrives in arguments, in gossip and confrontation. It's why it basks in compliments, in praise and awards. Because it doesn't care whether the energy is positive or negative, it just needs to feel important. It just needs to feel alive. Silence removes that feeling. In silence, there are no mirrors, no feedback, no stage. And so the ego begins to die a slow death. It screams at first, then it pleads, and eventually it fades into the background, like an old radio station losing signal. And what happens to a man in those 30 days is extraordinary. At first, he feels unsettled because the ego makes noise that feels like truth. It's the voice that says, you must prove yourself, you must speak, you must not be misunderstood. So when silence takes over, it feels like something is missing, but what's actually happening is that something is being exposed. You begin to realize how much of your speech was not communication, it was performance. You start noticing how often you responded not because it was necessary, but because your ego needed to win, or needed to be right, or needed to be loved. Silence strips all that away. It doesn't give you anything to react to. You sit alone, and in that aloneness, you come face to face with your own mind. And at first, it's loud. The ego rushes in with commentary, opinions, justifications. It replays old conversations. It rehashes old arguments. It imagines future scenarios where you finally get to speak your piece. But as you stay silent and as you refuse to respond, those voices grow weaker. You begin to realize how much of your mental activity was just noise, just ego searching for drama. And when you stop giving it the reaction it wants, you start gaining control. It is in this space of non-reaction that real strength is built, because it takes power to stay silent when provoked. It takes restraint to not engage when your ego is poked or prodded. And over time, you begin to understand something very deep, that not everything needs your energy. Not every insult needs a reply. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every opinion needs defense. You don't have to fight every battle your ego invites you to. In fact, most of those battles are designed to keep you stuck, to keep you proving, to keep you performing. But silence, sustained conscious silence, teaches you to choose your battles. It teaches you that inner peace is far more valuable than outer applause. As the days pass, you'll feel your energy shift. What once triggered you no longer moves you. The desire to respond fades. The compulsion to explain weakens. You realize that you don't need to be understood to be at peace. You don't need to be praised to feel valuable. You don't need to be right to feel strong. You simply need to be grounded in yourself. And silence gives you that grounding. It's not that the world stops provoking you. It's that your ego stops responding. You hear the insult and you smile. You feel the judgment and you stay still. Because now you know that your worth isn't found in someone else's reaction. It's found in your ability to remain unmoved. And in that stillness, something remarkable happens. You begin to rebuild your self-picture based on how others see you, but based on how you see yourself. You're no longer swayed by every opinion or praise or insult. You become rooted, centered, unshakable, because silence starved the ego long enough for your authentic self to emerge. The self that doesn't chase noise, the self that no longer reacts for attention, the self that has nothing to prove, because it understands that real power doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be present. Negative feelings are not random. They don't just appear out of nowhere. They are built slowly, silently, layer by a mind that has never been taught how to sit with itself. A man who is constantly reacting, constantly surrounded by sound, by opinions, by movement, never really learns to confront his own thoughts. And so those thoughts, especially the dark and unexamined ones, begin to grow in the background like mold in a damp room. The ego, desperate to protect its image, avoids discomfort. It seeks distractions. It blames others. It denies what it doesn't want to feel. That's why silence feels so dangerous at first. It removes the distractions and forces you to meet the things you've been avoiding. The bitterness, the resentment, the regret, the guilt, the shame. These are the shadows of the ego, the feelings it doesn't want to own. But something powerful happens in silence. You start to realize that negative emotions are not enemies. They are not signs of weakness. They are signals, messages, warnings. They are the proof that there's a part of you that has gone unheard, a part of you that needs healing, not judgment. But in a world addicted to noise, that part of you never gets a voice. You've been silencing it with busyness, with scrolling, with talking, with working, with pretending. And all the while, the pain has been stacking. Small comments you never addressed. Deep betrayals you never processed. Failures you buried. Dreams you gave up on. Silence doesn't create that pain, it simply reveals it. And at first, that revelation can feel unbearable. You sit down in silence expecting peace, but instead you get unrest. You expect serenity, but you're flooded with emotion. That's not a failure. That's the beginning of healing. Because for the first time, you're listening to yourself without running away. You're not judging your feelings. You're not trying to suppress them. You're simply allowing them to surface. And when they surface, you begin to see their roots. You realize that your anger isn't just about what happened last week. It's connected to something you never addressed 5 years ago. You realize your sadness isn't just about a recent rejection. It's tied to an old wound that was never acknowledged. Silence connects the dots. It reveals the patterns. The ego doesn't want this. The ego wants short-term relief. It wants quick fixes. It wants to numb. It wants to label your pain as someone else's fault so it doesn't have to change. But the truth is, no one can fix what you won't face. And silence forces you to face it, not with force, but with presence. When you sit in stillness long enough, you start to realize something profound. Your emotions are not as solid as they seem. They are movements, not facts. They rise and fall like waves. They grow stronger when resisted and softer when accepted. The moment you stop judging your sadness, it starts to soften. The moment you stop running from your anger, it begins to dissolve. This is how silence helps you overcome negative feelings, not by erasing them, but by teaching you to sit with them until they no longer control you. You begin to see that behind every negative emotion is a deeper need. Your sadness is asking for acknowledgement. Your fear is asking for safety. Your anger is asking for boundaries. Your guilt is asking for forgiveness. But none of those needs can be understood if you're always talking, always running, always distracting. In silence, you learn how to listen. Not to the outside world, but to your own soul. And in doing so, you start to meet the version of yourself that lives beneath the ego. The version that is tired of pretending, tired of pleasing, tired of performing. The process is not linear. Some days you will feel overwhelmed. Some days you will feel numb. But over time, you begin to notice the shift. The things that used to shake you no longer hit as hard. The wounds that once bled so easily now feel like healed scars. You begin to feel a quiet strength rising from within. Not a loud confidence that demands to be seen, but a grounded awareness that doesn't need validation. That's the reward of sitting with negative feelings in silence. You stop being afraid of them. You stop being afraid of yourself. You start to trust your inner voice. You start to realize that your emotions are not problems. They are your compass. They are leading you somewhere. And the more you honor them, the less power they have over you. You become emotionally sovereign, not ruled by triggers, but informed by them. You can feel sadness without drowning in it. You can feel anger without exploding. You can feel fear without freezing. That's what happens when the ego loses its grip, when the noise fades and the real you begins to emerge. Not the reactive you, not the wounded you, but the aware you. The you that listens, that observes, that heals. And that healing starts not with answers, but with silence. Most people don't realize that true control doesn't come from reacting, it comes from restraint. And the highest form of restraint is silence. Not just verbal silence, but emotional silence. Mental silence, the kind of silence that holds itself in the face of chaos, provocation, temptation, and noise. That kind of silence is misunderstood, often mistaken for weakness or avoidance. But in reality, it is one of the highest forms of power a human being can cultivate, because it's easy to speak. It's easy to argue. It's easy to try to prove a point, defend yourself, or correct someone who misunderstands you. What's hard is to sit in full awareness of what's being said or done to you and still choose to stay silent. Not because you're afraid, but because you understand that your energy is sacred. Silence is control over the self. It's refusing to hand over your peace just because the moment is uncomfortable. The ego wants the last word. It wants to be right. It wants to be heard and admired and defended. But silence cuts the ego off. It interrupts the program. And in that interruption, you begin to discover a different kind of power. One that doesn't beg for the spotlight, but grows stronger in the background. You start to see things more clearly when you're not reacting. You see people's intentions. You catch the manipulation. You feel the energy shift in the room. When you're silent, your perception sharpens. You become more aware of your surroundings, and more importantly, of yourself. Silence is not just absence of noise. It's the presence of awareness. It brings everything into focus. You begin to recognize the subtle ways your ego used to control your behavior. The way it needed to win arguments. The way it sought approval. The way it used anger to feel strong. But in silence, there's no audience to perform for. No one clapping, no one booing, just you and your thoughts. And in that stillness, you start to recognize the patterns that have governed you for so long, patterns you never noticed, because you were too busy responding to everything. But now you see them, and in seeing them, you gain power over them. And you start to realize how often you gave your power away, not because someone took it from you, but because you handed it over willingly in moments of emotional reaction. Every time you lashed out, every time you over-explained, every time you defended yourself to someone who never cared to understand you. That was your ego needing to be seen, needing to be right. But silence teaches you that you don't owe your voice to every situation. You don't owe your energy to every person. You don't have to prove your point to validate your truth. There's power in saying nothing. There's clarity in not responding. There's confidence in holding your ground without needing to justify why you're standing. And the longer you stay in silence, the more your inner world begins to organize itself. You become less reactive and more responsive. You start noticing your triggers instead of being owned by them. You catch yourself before you spiral. You breathe instead of explode. You reflect instead of retaliate. This is what silence does. It creates space between stimulus and response. And in that space is your growth, your wisdom, your evolution. The man who can hold himself in silence is the man who is no longer at the mercy of his emotions. He doesn't get baited into drama. He doesn't need to clap back. He doesn't crumble under misunderstanding. He is grounded, anchored, firm. There is a rare and sacred power in that kind of self-mastery. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. And the world feels it. People sense it. They notice your silence, not as absence, but as presence. They realize that you're not withholding words because you don't know what to say. You're withholding because you've evolved past the need to say it. You've grown out of the need to win petty battles. You've matured out of the need to be validated by external approval. You've become someone who chooses peace over pride. That choice doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. It means you speak only when it elevates the situation, not when it satisfies your ego. Over time, this silence becomes your shield. It protects your energy. It preserves your clarity. It keeps you from being swept up in the emotional storms of others. People may try to provoke you. They may misunderstand your silence as indifference. Let them. That's their lesson to learn. Yours is to master the art of restraint. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing your voice is a weapon you no longer use carelessly. You don't fire it off in every direction. You don't use it to harm or control or dominate. You use it with wisdom, with precision, with purpose. That is power. That is control. And it is born in silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of self-possession. The silence that listens, observes, discerns, and then chooses not to act just because it can, but only when it must. When you sit in silence, your perception of the world shifts. It's not that the world itself changes, but your ability to understand it deepens. You begin to see the forces at play behind every interaction, every reaction, every situation. The mind that is constantly busy, constantly distracted, cannot grasp these subtleties. It's too occupied with its own noise to pay attention to the nuances of what's happening around it. But when you quiet that mind, when you pull back from the noise and step into a space of stillness, you gain clarity. You begin to observe, not just with your eyes, but with your soul. This heightened awareness that comes from silence is the foundation of personal power. It's the ability to sense what others are truly saying beneath their words. It's the awareness of what's being left unsaid, the intention behind every gesture, the energy that fills a room before a word is spoken. The ego wants to react. It wants to judge, to categorize, to fix. But in silence, you become a witness, not a participant. You learn to let things unfold without jumping in to control them. You no longer rush to make judgments or leap into action at the first sign of discomfort. Instead, you watch and wait. You observe the dance of life without getting caught up in it. And in that waiting, in that stillness, you gain an understanding that is beyond the surface level. You start to see your own patterns more clearly. You see how you've been reacting to situations instead of responding to them with intention. You recognize the triggers that have been running the show all along. You realize that you've been responding out of fear, out of pride, out of unresolved wounds. And as those patterns become visible, you are no longer controlled by them. Silence creates the space for you to break free from the unconscious cycles that have been dictating your life. In the stillness, you begin to realize that the external world is simply a reflection of your internal state. The chaos you see outside is only a mirror of the turbulence inside. When you're caught in the whirlwind of reactions and emotions, everything feels out of control. But when you take a step back, when you remove yourself from the constant noise and distractions, you begin to realize that you are the one creating the chaos. It's not the world that's overwhelming you. It's your own inner turmoil that's projecting itself outward. Silence gives you the power to look at yourself objectively. You start to see your own fears, your insecurities, your self-doubt. You see the places where you've been seeking validation, where you've been running from pain, where you've been hiding from the truth. In silence, the ego is stripped of its distractions. There's no more need to prove yourself, no more need to seek approval. There's just you, raw, honest, unfiltered, and that is where real growth begins. The more you sit with yourself, the more you begin to accept who you are, flaws and all. You stop resisting your own humanity. You stop wishing you were different. Stop comparing yourself to others. You start judging yourself for your mistakes and start seeing them as lessons. The negative feelings that once controlled you, the guilt, the shame, the fear, lose their grip when you stop running from them. Silence allows you to face them not as enemies, but as teachers. You realize that these feelings are not here to defeat you. They are here to show you where you need healing, where you need growth. And when you sit with them long enough, you begin to see that they lose their power over you. The shift that happens in silence is profound. It's a shift from being driven by external circumstances to being driven by internal clarity. It's a shift from reacting out of fear to responding out of wisdom. When you are no longer controlled by negative feelings, you become free. You realize that your emotions don't define you. Your reactions don't define you. You are not your past, your mistakes, or your fears. You are the space between your thoughts, the awareness that watches them come and go. And once you realize this, once you realize that you are not the chaos you feel inside, you can begin to experience life with more peace, more clarity, and more control. This is what silence does. It brings you back to yourself. It allows you to shed the layers of identity and ego that you've built up over the years, the layers that are constantly trying to prove something to the world. When you sit in silence, you let go of the need to be anything other than who you are. You let go of the need to impress, to perform, to compete. You become whole in your own presence. You realize that you don't need to chase anything. Peace, love, happiness, because they are already within you, waiting to be uncovered. And in this silence, you discover the true source of your strength. Not in your ability to do, but in your ability to be. You stop measuring your worth by your accomplishments, by what others think of you, by how much you have or don't have. You begin to understand that you are enough just as you are. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. Silence teaches you that your value doesn't come from the world's approval, but from your own acceptance of yourself. And once you accept yourself, flaws, mistakes, and all, you realize that you are the most powerful force in your own life. When we speak of transformation, we often think of grand gestures, significant moments, or radical shifts in our circumstances. We envision breakthroughs, epiphanies, and events that dramatically alter the course of our lives. But true transformation is far subtler, and in many cases it begins with something as simple and yet as profound as silence. The silence we speak of here is not merely the absence of noise. It is the absence of the endless chatter that keeps us bound to our ego, to our fears, to the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we should be, and what we're capable of. The ego thrives on noise. It feeds on distraction, on external validation, on being seen, heard, and admired. It needs to prove itself, to constantly assert its importance. But silence forces a different kind of confrontation. It silences the noise, not just of the world, but of the self. When you step into silence, you disconnect from the external world and begin to reconnect with your true essence. He says, this silence is not passive, it is active in its ability to draw you inward, to create space for reflection and introspection. In the absence of external stimuli, you begin to hear the inner voice that has been drowned out by the constant clamoring of your thoughts, your emotions, and the opinions of others. In silence, you confront the false identities that the ego has built for you. These identities are the layers that you've wrapped around yourself in an attempt to fit into a world that constantly tells you who you should be. In silence, you begin to strip away these identities. You realize that you are not the persona you've created for the world. You are not the image you project, the achievements you accumulate, or the roles you play. You are something deeper, something more authentic, something untouched by the judgments and expectations of others. Silence reveals this truth to you. It exposes the lies you've been telling yourself and allows you to see who you really are underneath it all. The ego also thrives on its attachments to the past and the future. It holds on to memories, regrets, and resentments, and it anxiously anticipates what is yet to come. It keeps you stuck in a loop of past pain and future fear, preventing you from fully experiencing the present moment. Silence disrupts this cycle. It pulls you into the now, forcing you to let go of the stories of what happened yesterday and the worries of what may or may not happen tomorrow. In the silence, you are only left with what is. And in this space, you can truly begin to heal. You can let go of the baggage of the past and the fear of the future. You can stop living in a state of constant reactivity and start living in a state of presence. As you spend more time in silence, you begin to notice something else. Your negative emotions lose their grip on you. The anger, the frustration, the anxiety, all of these emotions that once seemed to control your every move begin to fade into the background. When you are no longer feeding them with your thoughts, no longer giving them the energy they crave, they lose their power. Silence allows you to break free from the chains of negative emotions that have been holding you captive. It gives you the freedom to choose your response rather than simply reacting from a place of emotional turmoil. You start to understand that you are not your emotions. They are simply visitors passing through. And in silence, you gain the ability to observe them without becoming entangled in them. The silence also gives you clarity. In the midst of the noise and distraction of everyday life, it's easy to lose sight of what truly matters. But when you remove yourself from that noise, you are able to reconnect with your purpose, your passions, and your desires. You can hear the whispers of your soul telling you what you really want, what you are truly meant to do. This clarity brings with it a sense of direction. It guides you forward with confidence and conviction, because you no longer have to second guess yourself or seek external validation. You know what you need to do because you've allowed yourself to hear your own truth. Over time, the practice of silence becomes a way of life. It's not something you do for a few minutes here and there. It becomes a part of who you are. It's a space you return to regularly, a place where you can connect with your inner self, reflect on your experiences, and find the peace that resides within you. And as you continue on this journey of silence, you begin to see the world differently. You begin to see that the things that once bothered you no longer have the same hold over you. You start to understand that the things that used to trigger you, the people who used to frustrate you, the situations that used to upset you, are simply opportunities for you to practice your newfound peace. Silence teaches you that you are not at the mercy of the world. You are the creator of your own experience. Your peace does not depend on what happens around you. It depends on what happens within you. And this is the final transformation that silence brings, the transformation of your inner world. When you master the art of silence, you master the art of self-mastery. You become the master of your own thoughts, emotions, and reactions. You no longer live as a victim of your circumstances. You live as a creator of your reality. Silence gives you the space to step into this power, to claim your truth, and to live from a place of inner peace and strength It is through silence that you tap into your highest potential, your deepest wisdom, and your truest self. And in this space, you are free. Free from the noise, free from the ego, free from the limitations you once believed defined you.